I recently made a video where I show that it's ineffective to try to use a Bloomline pair to record music in 360 degrees. So today's video is a follow-up to that, and it'll be a little lengthy probably, but I want to try to test a few other stereo mic configs and combinations of stereo mic configs that I might use in such a situation, recording music in 360 degrees. A couple explanations or warnings here. I am recording in an office and I'm just about 100 yards from two major interstates. So there's a lot of ambient noise here and my room is not very well treated acoustically. I just have a couple, I have 4 acoustic panels that I put around me, but it's a poor environment and I don't record here. I just do the occasional voiceover. But you will hear that in today's recordings. I'm using an expander on my voiceover just to make it a little less obnoxious as I'm speaking here, but you'll definitely hear that in the recordings. The second bit of explanation is that this is just a learning process for me, and I'm documenting it, maybe trying to help somebody else in a similar situation where you might be going into a live recording environment in a noisy place with poor acoustics, trying to record in 360 degrees. I haven't seen a lot of resources online to try to demo some of this, so I thought I'd share my learning process with you. So this is a learning process. I don't have experience recording in 360 degrees in a noisy environment, nor combining some of these stereo configs together. So it's a learning process. If you like what I find, great. If not, that's okay too. But I just haven't seen a lot of videos like this online, so I thought I'd share what I am trying to test today. And about the acoustics of the room, well, let me say first what the recording situation would be. A local brewery hosts a bluegrass jam session once a month, and if it's warm, they play outside next to 2 busy streets, and if it's cold, they play inside, kind of over in the corner of a glass and concrete cube. So the environmental noise there is really loud, clinking glasses, cars, people chatting, and the acoustics are poor regardless of where you are. So I don't feel so bad about testing these mics in a really horrible sounding room, because taming the ambient noise and the poor acoustics is something we'll want to do. You can't replicate the acoustics here, or the acoustics there in an office or a studio, no more than you can replicate having 10 to 20 musicians standing in a circle. But again, these are just some tests. The goal today then is to try to find some other configuration of stereo miking where I could fold 360 degrees down into a nice stereo image where I have good stereo width and accurate stereo imaging to the degree I can, and minimize ambient noise, minimize the poor acoustics, and hopefully try to avoid crazy phase issues like we saw in Bloomline, or comb filtering, which will come into play here. So that having been said, let me just flip over to my diagram here, which I used for Bloomline. If you saw that video, let's see, where am I? Bloomline. So I showed this illustration in my last video. So these illustrations are from the top down, and so the mics would be here, and the sound source in a typical situation, this would be stage center between the 2 mics here in Bloomline, and then our 360 degree circle of musicians would be like that. So Bloomline is clearly inappropriate for all the reasons I mentioned in that video. The next thing I want to talk about is something I tried to explain in the previous video, but I did a horrible job. And that is, if you have mics that are pointing at a sound source, let's say it's just one guitar, and the mics are pointing at that. If you're in a bad acoustic environment, so a room with really bad echo, reverb, all that, and maybe there's a lot of environmental noise, you're going to mitigate that by the use of a directional mic. If you have just one mic here, you're probably going to use like a cardioid or even a shotgun or whatever else, if it's really noisy, to try to maximize the signal of the guitar versus everything else that's coming around. So you'll use the polar pattern to minimize what's behind and to the sides to the degree you can. And you'll try a couple different polar patterns to see what's best. But if you have mics in the center of a 360 degree circle of musicians, you have your desirable sound sources in 360, and you have your undesirable sound sources. People talking and playing quarters around you. You can't use a directional mic in the center of this group to try to do that. You could hoist up, like a dual pair of XY or something like that, pointing down at 45 degrees. But I tend to think that omnis are actually going to be an advantage here, because we can put up a spaced pair of omnis in the center of this and be done with it. And we'll test that in a little bit here. That might be all we need. It will give us a decent stereo image if we choose our spacing right. It's going to have nice bass response and have good response across the board. So that might be the way to go. And it's super simple, and that's nice. If I didn't have these other two mics hanging off here and a smaller stereo bar, I could easily put a pair of omnis here and just be completely unobtrusive in the center, not have to disrupt their sight lines and all that. But since I want to try multiple rigs here, I went ahead and put 4 mics on one stand here. So the other pair of mics here is a pair of multi-pattern Austrian Audio OC818s. And so these guys are just amazingly versatile. We can choose all sorts of polar patterns, but each of these also, since they have 2 diaphragms, they actually have 2 mic outputs. So you can get the signal from each diaphragm independently. At that point, you have 4 diaphragms pointing at every 90 degrees, all at the same polarity, all in phase, and they're coincident with each other. So it's a pretty cool thing, and so you can get all sorts of polar patterns out of this, both from the switches on the mics, or if you use all 4 outputs, you can actually record all the 4 diaphragms independently and decide on your polar patterns afterward, which is really cool. Unfortunately, these are not coincident with the spaced pair, so that's where we might get some comb filtering and phase issues and things like that, but we'll just have to test that. So my plan today then is to test a spaced pair of omnis at 30 centimeters, and I'll get into in a few minutes how I chose 30 centimeters. And then I also want to try to test several different configs of these multi-pattern mics. And I also want to test the ABs plus these cardioids. When you have 4 diaphragms independent, they're basically 4 cardioids pointed every 90 degrees. So I could use the ABs as the mains and then have these potted down until I need to pot them up for a soloist. So those 4 cardioids would look something like this. And so it gets a bit confusing here, but you'll just have to bear with me. Mic 1 is pointing at 0 degrees. Mic 2 is pointing at 90 degrees over here. So if we have the AB mains, then we could, if we have a soloist at 90 degrees, we'll just pot up mic 1 front diaphragm. Again, we're going to have maybe some phase issues, maybe some combing. We're definitely going to have some comb filtering. But about phase issues, a spaced pair of omnis, their stereo imaging is derived pretty much 100% from time delay differences. So time delay equals phase. So you already have some phase issues with spaced pairs, but adding one more sound source to each left and right channel is going to add to that to some degree. But I think more importantly, it's going to add some comb filtering because these are coincident with each other, but not with these guys. And just to kind of review, these 2 mics panned hard left and right cannot create comb filters. Comb filters come from combining mics at different distances into the same channel. So that's where when we mix these in left and right and center, you will have comb filtering. Okay, we'll see that. But in addition, as I said, you could use these 4 diaphragms as 4 independent mics. So you could use these by themselves, in which case maybe you pan them center, left, center, right. And that was my first thought before I thought of double XY. And this will give a good recording in terms of, I think, well, it'll probably be a fairly narrow stereo image because anything that's over on the left side here will be getting into mic 2 front at 90 degrees, panned hard. Oh, that should be right. Doggone it. Anyway, you just have to say I got that reversed here for a few minutes. This would be panned hard right. So you're going to hear that in the right channel, but it's also going to be entering the front and the rear of mic 1, which is pan center. So that's going to pull it in toward the center. So I think this will give a narrow stereo image if you use it by itself. It won't have any phase issues, like I said, because all these are the same polarity. So that's another way to go. All right, as is always the case, I thought of one more thing I meant to say, but I didn't realize until after I was almost done editing, and that is, when I first considered how to use these two mics by themselves with the 4 diaphragms independent, for whatever reason, I envisioned them one mic pointing forward and the other at 90 degrees, such that mic 1, both front and rear, would be centered. And again, this is reversed here. This should say right and this should say left. But mic 2 would be left and right. Again, giving a slightly narrower image. But I don't know why it didn't occur to me that really a double XY is probably going to be better. So I've just flipped these mics, or I've rotated them 45 degrees. And in essence, we have bloom line here, except that all 4 diaphragms are the same polarity. So it's all in phase. So my gut feeling is that this will be better than that other config. I think it's going to be wider. Everything should be in phase. There'll probably be some, I don't know, some level differences. I'm not really sure here. Probably, since we have 2 pretty hot spots in both pointing to the right, this might be a little louder than this. I'm not really sure, but you get the idea here. Let's just try it and see how it sounds. In addition to that, then we could do omni mid-side. If you don't know anything about mid-side recording, you should probably watch another video because I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on this. But one of the things you can do with these 2 mics is put the top one in omni, recording equally in 360 degrees. Put the bottom one in figure 8, and then use that for the side and use this for the mid. So mid-side is a really cool recording technique, and especially I think with omni, it's kind of an obvious fit for 360 degrees because, number one, it folds down to mono perfect. And so this, in terms of mono compatibility, omni mid-side is going to be the best. But you're going to get some decent stereo imaging. One of the issues, and I probably should just talk about this when I'm playing back our tests here, but one of the issues you have with mid-side is if you pot up the sides equal to the mid in terms of the volume, you're going to get some weird phasey sound from there, especially over here on the sides. It's going to sound phasey, a little unnatural, but that's also how you get your widest stereo because you're maximizing, well, you're potting up the sides. Typically, if you're using mid-side to record something that's generally in the front of you, you would have your sides down 6 or even 9 dB from the mid. So we'll just have to play with that and see if there's a good mix we can get, a good wide image, but without any of the weird phasey sound. So, all right, I think that's it for the illustrations. One thing I wanted to mention here, and this is where we really get into this is just for kind of pre-planning. You shouldn't consider this the Bible, nor should you base all of your recording on this. But one of the cool tools I really like having available here is this calculator for stereo recording angles. And this calculator is at sengpielaudio.com. If you just go online and search Sengpiel SRA, it'll go right here, Sengpiel. That'll take you to a page like this. And it explains that these calculations are based on formulas created by Eberhard Sengpiel. I have not researched this to find out if there's any legitimate criticism of the formulas and this tool. I assume it's not perfect, and I assume that anything I use here I would want to test using my ears, but it's really cool to have this to get maybe some foresight into what different configs might do in different situations. So if you click on any one of these links, it takes you into the tool and just picks which stereo config you're working with here. But you can do the same thing once you're in here, just switch it. So it has a bunch of different near coincident cardioid configs here, like ORTF, DIN, and OS. And once you select something like ORTF, it sets your polar pattern to cardioid, it sets your spacing of the mics to 17 centimeters and the angle to 110. So that is ORTF. once you choose a system, you can change these by hand. If I wanted to try moving those out to 20 centimeters, I can do that. If I want to change the angle to 90, I could do that. And that just happens to be what? DIN? Yeah, that's actually DIN. But just to say that you can change the angle either in these inputs or you can actually drag these, which is really cool. It gets a little confusing. But again, just using the presets is nice. The other part of this tool, which I think you have to use if you're using this, is to set your orchestra angle. So in addition to setting the mic angles, patterns, and spacing, you have an orchestra angle here. So these 5 tick marks here are the width of your sound source, basically. So if your orchestra is at 150 degrees, let's put it down to 120, maybe a little bit more typical. So you notice these are now at 60 degrees left and 60 degrees right. So that is, how wide is your orchestra? If your first violins are at about 60 degrees left and your cellos and basses are about 60 degrees right, then you have 120 degree orchestra angle. If it's more narrow, then you might have 90. You might have your leftmost instruments at 45 and your rightmost at 45. Typically, you do not determine your stereo recording angle. The stereo recording angle is one of the later things that comes in the process of determining where you want to place your mics. So in any given recording situation, you're going to pick whether you're cardioid or omnidirectional, and you're going to decide how far from your ensemble can you place your mics. And that the width of your ensemble plus the distance from them, that's what's going to give you your orchestra angle. And that's based on the acoustics of the room and how much you want to hear the room and the ambience around it. But it's unlikely you're going to tell your conductor to move everybody in. That's just not going to happen. So given that your orchestra angle is probably predetermined, I would enter this first and then start playing with, okay, how can I optimize that? So that's the orchestra angle on those tick marks, and you can see there's just basically wide right and then half right. And they just kind of break that up so you can visualize it. So then you visualize it up here, how far left and right each of these tick marks will appear to be in your speakers. Then the other really important part of this that plays into how wide that is your stereo recording angle. I should make a video about just this tool because I find this so interesting. But this shaded portion here is your stereo recording angle. And that is determined by your microphone system, the width, the polar pattern, and the angle. So it takes into account intensity differences and time arrival differences between the two mics and estimates what your stereo recording angle is. So I'm going to try to say this without misspeaking here. Roughly, stereo recording angle is the angle left and right of center where a sound source will be appearing to be hard right in the right speaker or hard into the left speaker, all the way in the left or right speakers. So for example, right now we have a stereo recording angle of 96 degrees that's determined by ORTF, and we have an orchestra angle of 120 degrees. So since the stereo recording angle is less than the orchestra angle, that means that everything from here to here will be compressed, flattened into the right speaker, because you can't, without doing some weird phase things, you can't get farther right than fully in the right speaker. And again, it's not necessarily that it's 100% level in the right speaker. It's a combination of the level differences and the time differences, and it's what we interpret in our brains to be full left. The point being that anything from here to here is flattened. Okay, so if, for example, your orchestra angle, and you can actually move this one by hand as well, is wider, you can see that pretty much everything from here to here is flattened into the right speaker. And we see that up here. This gold tick mark, which should be halfway between 0 and right, is all the way out here, almost completely in the right speaker. So not only is this flattened, but you have what you call a hole in the middle here. So you have everything distorted outward from the center. So anything that in here is going to be distorted out farther in the stereo image than you would want it. So if you truly did have 175 degrees, you'd really want a different, you want to work with something different than ORTF. But in my case, I was using this for my AB because that's really what I want to know. And so if you come in at AB, and I'm going to go ahead and switch my orchestra angle to 180. So I'm assuming that the way we're going to fold 360 into 180 is that this will be center. This should appear as far right as possible, and this will be center. So you're just folding it in half. You're mirroring it front to back. So I'm going to have essentially, because omnis are going to pick up equally front and rear, I'm just going to think of this as 280s. The back side will be a mirror image of the front. So I'm assuming an orchestra angle of 180 degrees, and the default AB here is 51 centimeters. I don't know where that number came from. I'm guessing somebody else can tell me. You can also choose 30, 60, or 120 centimeters. So as you vary this, let's go up to 120. So clearly at 120 centimeter spacing, a spaced pair of omnis has a very narrow stereo recording angle. And that's 50 degrees. And that's 25 degrees left, 25 degrees right. So clearly we have everything widened, but we also have this just gigantic hole in the middle. And everything that should be in the middle here is just distorted way out. So if we really do have 180 degrees we want to capture, we need to move these in farther until we get 180 degrees. So around 40 or 50 here is where it gets to 180 degrees. But although this has a stereo recording angle of 180 degrees, we can see we still have a lot of distortion. The mid right and the mid left is distorted way out. So we're going to move these even closer, and we can see things start moving in. Unfortunately, with the middle moving in, we also have, oops, how did I do that? I want to go down to 30. We also have the outer limits moving in. So if this tool is correct, what's happening here is that we're getting a little bit less distortion. We're getting the mid left and mid right moving in, but we're also not getting as wide a stereo image. And you can just show that even further. If you go down to 20 centimeters, then it's getting narrower and narrower. It's hard to say twice. More narrow and more narrow. So the reason I chose 30 is I thought it was a good balance of stereo width versus minimizing the distortion. So again, this is a tool. So I would start off with 30, and if halfway through it felt too wide, the only thing I can do is move them closer together. But that's where I'm starting. All right, so that's about all I can do with these screens here. What I'm going to do here then next is to record. I think I can do this with 2 recordings. I'm going to do one recording that I can use for my spaced pair alone. I can also use the spaced pair plus the cardioid spot mics. I can also use that recording for using all 4 of my cardioids alone in both that, what did I call that? What's that called? I just called it 4 cardioids here, but it's the placement where I have mic 1 at the center, both front and rear, and then mic 2 left, right. So I can test that using the same recording, and then I can also use the same recording to test these 4 in double XY. There's a little bit of weirdness here in that in this config, I have the top mic pointing front and center. So actually, if I test XY, 45 degrees will actually be center at that point. So I'll be walking around here. Even though I'll start at 0, it's not until I get to 45 in double XY that I'll sound like I'm in the center. So I'll explain that as I'm demoing these. Okay, and then I'll stop down, reconfigure the polar patterns such that I'll just use the front. I'll use the 2 mics in Omni mid-side, and I'll show you how I do that in a bit. Okay, I guess that's it for talking. Let's go ahead and do some demos. Okay, so I've made my 2 recordings, and now it's time to listen to these recordings in various mixes to create our different stereo configs. Let me talk first about the channels here. So channels 1 and 2 are my spaced pair of omnis, panned hard left and hard right. And then channels 3 through 6 are my OC818s with the mic 1 front, mic 2 front, mic 1 rear and mic 2 rear. And you'll notice the panning of these will change as we're testing this because I'll be doing different configs. So don't rely on this right here. One thing I want to talk about just briefly here, this meter in the lower right is the stereo phase scope, and this is on the master bus alone. And so what this does is it's showing the stereo imaging and the phase correlation of the left and right channels of the master bus. So you'll notice since I'm speaking into one channel here, mono, I'm always going to have a +1 correlation, which is perfect correlation. You can't have anything else with mono. You'll notice as I stop speaking, it'll drift down to 0. But in general, that's pegged at +1, and that's the only thing mono can be, really. And on the right side here, you see in this polar graph, I'm pretty much a pinpoint right in the center. And so if I pan halfway right, you can see I'm rotating this over toward the right, and hard right would be all the way over here, which is more like this, but I'm still a pinpoint. You do notice that if I go hard right, then correlation goes to 0. It's because there is no left signal here. If I come back just a tick, then I'm pegged at heart +1 again. So that's a choice the developer of this plugin made. I think that if there is no input, don't show any correlation. But it might as well be +1 because there's no negative correlation. It's kind of a conceptual thing. But what I expect to see when I show stereo is, number one, this will not be pegged +1. And depending on which kind of mics and stereo config I'm using, it'll dance around, maybe even going towards 0 and maybe in the negative. It depends. In general, we don't want it to live below 0 for very long. But a spaced pair of omnis, they derive their stereo imaging from the arrival time differences from channel 1 to channel 2. So, at a given frequency and a given distance, time is phase, basically. And so with a spaced pair of omnis, we do have different sort of phasing, but it's what our ears are a spaced pair as well. So some of that feels more natural to some people. And that's kind of some people perceive spaced pairs as more realistic, others don't, but you will have some odd phase things going on. And in fact, if I had that spaced pair, if I calculated the exact frequency, I could get a tone generator here, a sine wave, and if I stood at 90 degrees, I could peg that at -1. So it's frequency dependent as to whether you have phase issues. But in general, if it's dancing below 0 a lot, it's something we need to look at. But you ought to hear that before you see it. And then the other part of this graph, when we have stereo, you're going to see this broaden out from a point to a blob, and the stereo specificity of the imaging and the phase issues will determine how wide that blob is. I will say that in a poorly treated room like this, you're going to have a lot of reflections arriving out of phase. And so this blob will be wider in a poor acoustic environment. If we were in an anechoic chamber, you would see a lot less of that. Or in a good studio, you would see, not so crazy a blob. But that is what you expect to see here. Let's see, what else can I talk about that? I think you'll see that the coincident pair of those multi-pattern mics will have a much more specific stereo image, but whether that's more pleasing to you or better is really kind of it's a decision you'll have to make. But I will say that if I can take all 4 mics and record all 6 channels, that gives me so many options to mix this. So. All right, I think it's time to listen to these. Let's go ahead. I have to reconfigure this really quickly. First thing I want to listen to is the spaced pair of omnis by themselves. So I will switch off my voiceover and let's listen to that. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do A, B, and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mics. I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees, so I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high-pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135 degrees, 13531, 13531. I like palindromes. Coming around now, I'm now to 180 degrees, and I almost knocked over my acoustic panel, which probably would have not landed on my dog. How's that sound at 180? Now I'm walking around further to 225. I finally memorized these numbers. 225, 225, 22. 225 degrees. And you're going to get tired of me talking here. I wish I could come up with something a bit more creative to say. I'm now at 270 degrees, 270, 270. Walking around now to the penultimate position of the first test, 315, 315 degrees, should be slightly left. I had to think about that. And coming around to full circle, I'm back at 0 or 360, 360 or 0. All right, so I'm now in the first. All right, that sounded pretty good, I think. And if I was in the situation where I just wanted to be minimal and as unobtrusive as possible, those two Schoeps omnis sound really good. A couple more things I'm listening for here is how does the front and back sound identical? Does 0 sound identical to 180? And it pretty much does here. Another thing to listen for, though, is that even though I talked about we can't really use directional mics to isolate sound, that's kind of a lie, because the reflections coming off the floor and the ceiling are going to be greater in the omnis than they are in the 4 cardioids. So that's a bit of a trade-off again. Okay, so the next thing I want to test then is I want to listen to these ABs and use my 4 cardioids as spot mics. So these 4 cardioids are 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180, 270. So as I start at 0, I can pot this guy up to be a spot or solo mic for somebody standing directly in front. And if at 45 degrees, I could probably pot these two up and use that as a 45 degree spot mic. So let's listen to, let me get these configured so I can use my control panel correctly here. So I'm going to listen to the same thing again with the ABs, and then I'll just try to pot up some spot mics here. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do AB and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mics. I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees, so I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high-pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135 degrees, 13531, 13531. I like palindromes. Okay, so I think those work fairly effectively as stereo or as solo spots. However, they're going to have comb filtering, and you could hear that. The comb filtering, depending on the frequency, is going to be maybe greater at 90 degrees versus 45 degrees. It should be pretty good at 0 and 180 because they should be mostly in phase, or mostly, yeah, in phase. But you're going to have it. And when we put 10 to 20 musicians in a 360 degree circle, I'm not sure. Are the comb filters going to be worse or better? I'm not sure. It's just something you'll have to test. So I think they work fairly effectively for their purpose, though. Okay, so the next thing that I can do with this first recording is to try to listen to the 4 cardioids by themselves. And if you'll remember, when I have them as 4 cardioids, I have them positioned. Oh, that's not it. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. I have the mic 1 front panned center, and then mic 2 front panned right. I don't think this is going to be the best stereo image, but that's the way these are working now. So let's just listen to that and see what we can hear. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do A, B, and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mics. I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees, so I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high-pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135 degrees, 13531, 13531. I like palindrome. You'll have to trust me that the backside is pretty much the same as the front. So as expected, we have a more narrow stereo image, but we have pretty good phase correlation and we have fairly good imaging. So I kind of like that, but I think the double XY is going to sound even better. So it's pretty much using the same 4 recording, or the same 4 tracks we just listened to, but just panning them differently. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do A, B, and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mics. I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees, so I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high-pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135 degrees, 13531, 13531. I like palindromes. Coming around now, I'm now to 180 degrees, and I almost knocked over my acoustic panel, which probably would have not landed on my dog. How's that sound at 180? Now I'm walking around further to 225. I finally memorized these numbers. 225, 225, 22. All right. So I think that sounds pretty good. I think this is a better way to go than the 4 cardioids with 2 of them centered. So I think where the outer limits of those XYs overlap, it seems to me that the 90 degrees and 270 is going to be a bit louder than everything else. And I don't know that there's a way to get around that, but I don't know. Maybe it's just conceptual. Okay, so then the last thing I want to demo here then would be the Omni midside. And midside is so cool in that you in the mix you can vary your stereo width. And I don't remember how much I got into this a few minutes ago talking before I made the recordings, but midside is always going to sound, it might sound a bit phasey, so we can vary these. But let me just show you really quickly. Let me switch to my Omni midside and then solo myself here. Okay, so I've muted the rears of these 2 because I switched the polar patterns on these mics. So I'm really just getting the output of the main outputs of mic 1 and mic 2. And they're both centered here, but they are, this one is Omni and this one is figure 8. And then I'm sending these to buses. I'm sending this just to the mid bus, and then this one to the side left and side right buses. So here, that's where we send them to the master. So this is my omni mid, and these are my two sides, left and right. And then of course we reverse the phase. So as I play this back, I'm going to vary the, let me hang on just a second here. Let's see, get these, let's see, this and this. Just getting my control panel here so I can do this on the fly. I'm going to vary the levels of the sides here so that you can hear what, how it's going to sound phasey if they're up to 0, but it will be a wider stereo. So in general, if I were mixing mid-side, if it was just something in front of me, trying to record something in front, I might tend to mix it around -3 to -6. Something in 360, maybe I'd go a bit hotter. I don't know. Oops, I didn't want to get all 3 of those. Get this back to 0. Yeah, so let's just see what it sounds like. Okay, so I have switched my polar patterns now such that the polar pattern of the top multi-pattern mic is omni, and the bottom mic, the polar pattern is figure 8. So now I'm just using the primary outputs of both mics. Omni on the top and figure 8 on the bottom. So I'm now at 0 degrees, 0, 0. At the top of the circle, 12 o'clock. And now I'm at 45 degrees. Should be, let's see, about 1:30 on your clock, 45 degrees, a little bit right. So now I'm all the way over at 90 degrees, full right, 90 degrees, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Walking on around, I'm now at 135, 135 degrees, 135, 531. I'm now at 180 degrees, 180, 180. Should be center, but I'm talking from behind the mics. I'm now, let's see, 225, 225 degrees, partially left, maybe half left, I guess you'd say. 225, 225. Walking around now, continuing to 270, 270, 270 degrees. Trying to not trip over the mic cables here. I'm now at 315, the penultimate position of the ultimate last test here, 315 degrees. And now I've come full circle. I'm back at 0, or you could call it 360, 720. Is it 360, 720, or 0? You choose. All right, you get the general idea there. Mid-side is so cool. Just the fact that you can vary the stereo width is really pretty cool thing to be able to do. One thing that we need to consider is mono compatibility. So on one end of the spectrum, we have omni mid-side, which is going to be perfect mono compatibility. And on the opposite extreme, I think we're going to have the spaced pair, which is going to be the worst mono compatibility. But I don't think at 30 centimeters spacing, I don't think the mono is going to be too bad. So I would like to demo the mono compatibility a bit here. Let me think, what should I do? I think what I'll do is I'll just do 3. I'll do 3 configs here. I'll do the AB, and I'll do the spaced pair, and then I will AB the mono on and off just to hear the difference there. I think mono is going to sound pretty good there. And then I'll try the double XY, and I will AB the mono there. And then I'll do the mid-side, and same thing, just to see the difference. I know that the omni mid-side is going to be very good, glorious Brian Wilson mono. So we know that, but let's just see what we have. Oh, one thing I should mention here, that this stereo phase meter, ignore this when I'm doing mono, because my mono switch here is in my monitor bus, and that comes after the master bus. So since this scope is in the master bus, it really, in fact, let's just get rid of it. All right, so here we go with AB. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do AB and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mic, so I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees, so I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135. Okay, you get the idea. There was some comb filtering there, and that's the trade-off with a spaced pair. If you need mono compatibility, you're going to get some comb filtering with a spaced pair there. Let's next try the XY. Let's see. Same one, same recording. Where are we here? There we go. So from here, and we'll go to XY, double XY, and we'll see what the mono compatibility is here. All right, so I'm now in the first config where I can do AB and then the 4 cardioids. As I mentioned, I think the mics are about chest height, so the 2 omni spaced pair are about at my nose level, and the multi-pattern mics are just below chest level. So I'm about 2 feet from the mics, and I'm going to walk all the way around. Right now I'm at 0 degrees. So I'll just walk around and tell you where I am. 0, 0 degrees, 0, 0. I'm now at 45 degrees, which should be slightly right. 45 degrees, 45, 45. I'll just keep saying the numbers because we need a bit more than just a word or two at each place. Moving around now to 90 degrees, 90, 90, 90. Hopefully you're not hearing my footsteps too much. I don't have any high pass filters on here. So now we'll move around to the next one at 135 degrees, 13531, 13531. I like palindromes. Coming around now, I'm now to 180 degrees. All right, that sounds pretty good. As we would expect, these diaphragms are all in phase. They are coincident, so that sounds pretty good. Last mono test we want to do is mid-side. Okay, so I have switched my polar patterns now such that the polar pattern of the top multi-pattern mic is omni, and the bottom mic, the polar pattern is figure 8. So now I'm just using the primary outputs of both mics. Omni on the top and figure 8 on the bottom. So I'm now at 0 degrees, 0, 0. At the top of the circle, 12 o'clock. And now I'm at 45 degrees. Should be, let's see, about 1:30 on your clock, 45 degrees, a little bit right. So now I'm all the way over at 90 degrees, full right, 90 degrees, 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Walking on around, I'm now at 135, 135 degrees, 135, 531. I'm now at 180 degrees, 180, 180. Should be center, but I'm talking from behind the mics. Okay, this concludes all my tests. It took a while to do. This is a long video, but I've learned a little bit here, and hopefully, as I said, since I didn't see a lot of videos like this out there, maybe it'll help somebody else as well. Good luck.